Henry didn't hate his wife, he just ashamed of her. So he, taking his lover to a business meeting as his wife, he thought he had everything under control. But what was about to happen at that meeting would leave him completely in shock. Henry had built a life of prestige and power, the image of a successful entrepreneur. In his luxurious office, he cut an impressive figure, exuding confidence as he navigated business deals and charmed his associates. On the surface, he was the epitome of accomplishment, a man who seemingly had it all. However, beneath this polished exterior, Henry harbored deep disdain for his wife, Meghan. They had been married for over 15 years. In the early days, Meghan had been Henry's unwavering support, believing in his potential and helping him reach the success he craved. She took care of their home, managed their daily lives, and stood by him through the lean years. Together, they shared dreams, laughed off challenges, and seemed like the perfect couple to face the world. But as Henry climbed higher in the business world, his perception of Meghan began to shift. She no longer fit the image he wanted to project. Meghan's quiet, simple demeanor stood in contrast to the glamorous life Henry now desired. To him, she had become a hindrance to his ambitions, a woman too modest to dazzle at corporate galas and business meetings. Henry dismissed the idea of taking Meghan to these events, finding her unfit to represent his success. This is when Phoebe entered his life. Phoebe was everything Meghan wasn't: youthful, captivating, and confident. She thrived on attention and luxury, and Henry saw her as the ideal companion for his business dealings. He began to bring her along to important dinners, presenting her as his partner at social gatherings. Phoebe drew eyes and admiration wherever she went, and Henry reveled in the power of having her by his side. Their affair deepened with each business meeting, and Phoebe became a permanent fixture in his double life. Henry believed he had perfected his deceit. To him, Meghan was merely a shadow in his life, someone he could easily keep at arm's length. But unbeknownst to Henry, Meghan was more perceptive than he gave her credit for. She noticed his frequent business dinners, unexpected trips, and flimsy excuses. Meanwhile, Henry continued to orchestrate his plans with Phoebe, believing he held all the cards. The opportunity of a lifetime presented itself to Henry, an exclusive meeting with foreign investors. This wasn't just another business deal. It was a chance to elevate his company to new heights, with millions on the line. However, Henry knew that sealing this deal required more than financial acumen. The investors needed to be impressed, charmed by the right image. He briefly considered taking Meghan to the meeting, but quickly dismissed the thought. Meghan? He muttered to himself with disdain, imagining her reserved demeanor in the company of these high-profile businessmen. She lacked the sparkle and charisma he believed essential to captivate the investors. Phoebe, on the other hand, was a perfect fit. Henry envisioned her radiating confidence, charming the investors with her beauty and poise. Satisfied with his choice, Henry made up his mind. Phoebe would accompany him to this crucial meeting, and her presence would be the final touch to secure the deal. He saw her as the missing piece to his success, the allure that would captivate the investors and elevate his position in their eyes. With Phoebe by his side, Henry was convinced he could clinch the contract without a hitch. Yet, Henry was acutely aware that Meghan could not know about the trip. Despite her outward trust, he couldn't risk any mistakes. He needed to carefully execute his plan, ensuring Meghan remained in the dark. That evening, Henry sat down for dinner with Meghan, steeling himself for the first step in his deception. As she served the meal, with her usual gentle smile, Henry initiated the conversation. "Love," he said casually, slicing into his steak. "Remember that important meeting I mentioned? It's finally been scheduled. I'll need to travel later this week, just for a day or two. It's critical for closing a major contract." Meghan, as always, looked at him with calm, trusting eyes. "Of course, dear. I know this means a lot to you. If you need help packing, just let me know. Henry managed a composed smile, concealing his satisfaction at how smoothly his plan was unfolding. He knew Megan trusted him completely and would never suspect his true intentions. "Thank you, love, but that won't be necessary," he replied lightly. Henry's confidence was unshaken. He believed he had everything under control. What he didn't know was that the true surprise of the evening would not come from the investors or the success of his plan. Megan, quietly watching and waiting, was far more aware of her husband's betrayal than he realized. The moment of reckoning was drawing closer, and Henry was wholly unprepared for what lay ahead. It was going to be a quick and intense trip. "I prefer to travel light, without too much baggage. Besides, this will be a great opportunity to seal that $1 million contract I've been telling you about. The investors are thrilled. We need to impress them, and I'm confident this will open enormous doors for the company," Henry said, full of determination. Megan admired his dedication to work, unaware that he was meticulously planning the trip to be with his lover. In Henry's mind, everything was unfolding perfectly. He had arranged every detail to ensure Phoebe would be available on the travel date. The following day, he called her with his usual confident tone. Henry on the phone with Phoebe. "Phoebe, the meeting with the foreign investors is set. I want you by my side. It's going to be a significant event, and your presence will make all the difference. We'll impress them. And with you alongside me, I'm certain everything will go perfectly." On the other end, Phoebe smiled, ready to step into her role as Henry's business partner. Everything was in place. Henry could already visualize the scene in his mind. He and Phoebe entering the meeting room, the approving looks from the investors, the signing of a lucrative contract. Meanwhile, Megan would stay at home, ignorant of the truth, trusting in the facade of a husband devoted to his career. To Henry, everything was flawless. He would have the best of both worlds, success in business and the ideal companion by his side. But what he didn't realize was that no matter how perfectly he orchestrated his plan, something unexpected was waiting to shatter his confidence and tear down his illusion of control. The day of the trip to Argentina arrived, and Henry brimmed with confidence. With a smile on his face and a tailored suit, he arrived at the airport with Phoebe, who turned heads with every step. She looked stunning in an elegant dress that accentuated her figure and radiated a sophistication that Henry believed would be the key to winning over the investors. As soon as they landed in Buenos Aires, Henry and Phoebe headed straight to the luxurious conference room in the hotel where the meeting would take place. The setting was refined, a large polished wooden table in the center, surrounded by black leather chairs. The walls were adorned with modern artworks, and huge windows offered a breathtaking view of the city. The air was thick with anticipation. This contract had the potential to change the future of his company, and Henry was determined to shine. Henry walked into the room with an air of superiority, passing the receptionist without so much as a glance. He made his way directly to the table, where 3 investors awaited him. A middle-aged man with a serious expression and an aura of authority, a rather ordinary-looking woman exuding confidence, and another man who seemed more relaxed, but equally attentive. With a confident smile, Henry addressed them. "Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It's a pleasure to finally meet you all. I'm thrilled to discuss the future of our partnership." He took a seat at the head of the table, Phoebe beside him. The investors observed them closely, and Henry could feel their eyes shifting towards Phoebe, which only fueled his confidence. He introduced her with an air of pride. "Before we begin," Henry continued, "I'd like to introduce you to my wife Phoebe. She is an integral part of who I am and what we are building." Phoebe offered a polite smile, but Henry couldn't help noticing the subtle reaction from the female investor. She raised an eyebrow, seemingly sizing up the situation. Though Henry interpreted it as a positive response, the woman's faint smile hinted at something more guarded. "Bonjour? It's a pleasure to meet you, Phoebe." The female investor spoke in a measured tone, her English with French accent adding an air of refinement. She wore dark sunglasses, with thick black hair cascading around her shoulders, and her bangs slightly veiled one side of her face. "I'm sure you have valuable insights to share." Henry missed the subtle challenge in her words. "Exactly," he replied eagerly. "Phoebe has a unique vision of the market, and her contribution will be crucial to our success." The female investor offered no more than a nod, and Henry launched into his proposal with renewed enthusiasm. He presented charts and figures while Phoebe nodded attentively at key moments, seeming deeply engaged. As he gestured with conviction, he declared, "Our company is on the verge of a major breakthrough. This contract is not just an opportunity for profits, but also a step towards an innovative future. With your investment, we can expand our horizons." The male investors seemed receptive, but Henry could sense the female investor's reserved demeanor. Her attention wasn't solely on the figures. It felt as though she was appraising the dynamic between him and Phoebe. Despite his rising confidence, something about her presence unnerved him. She had a mysterious yet familiar quality to her that Henry couldn't explain. He shook the thought away. His mind quickly returned to the meeting. "In your last report," she said with a slight edge, "you mentioned the need for structural changes. Could you elaborate on how you plan to implement them?" Henry smiled, trying to regain his sense of control. "Of course. We are ready to integrate new technologies that will boost our efficiency by 30%. This not only means higher profits, but also the opportunity to provide better service to our clients." Yet as he spoke, the atmosphere began to shift. The female investor's gaze sharpened, as though she were assessing something beyond the presentation. Henry could feel his confidence beginning to waver under her scrutiny. He pressed on, ignoring the growing knot of discomfort in his chest. "And how do you plan to handle governance issues that may arise with the implementation of these innovations?" she asked, her tone now direct and challenging. "It's crucial to ensure all stakeholders are engaged." Henry hesitated for a fraction of a second, caught off guard. He hadn't expected his uncertainty to show, and quickly sought to regain his footing. "Absolutely," he responded, masking his unease with a practiced smile. "We are committed to maintaining an open dialogue with all our partners. Transparency is key, and we're ready to address concerns one by one." As he continued speaking, a small alarm began to ring in his mind. He hadn't anticipated the conversation turning so intricate, and Phoebe's presence, which was supposed to serve as his greatest support, didn't seem to be having the effect he had imagined. For the first time, he questioned whether bringing her had been the right choice. The female investor remained silent, but her eyes never left him. The tension in the room thickened, and Henry found himself grappling with an unsettling realization. Charm and appearances wouldn't suffice to manipulate this situation. He had underestimated his audience and overestimated his own influence. Henry was in the midst of his closing remarks when the female investor finally leaned forward. Her posture, which had been somewhat polite, now shifted to one of keen intensity. She removed her sunglasses, revealing dark, piercing eyes that seemed to read through him. She addressed Henry in fluent, polished French, her voice cool and unyielding. "Monsieur Henry, charm alone will not secure this partnership. You must demonstrate true commitment and understanding. Otherwise, I'm afraid our expectations will not be met." Henry felt his composure slipping, a bead of sweat forming at his temple. He nodded, struggling to maintain his smile. "Of course, madam. I understand perfectly," he replied, though he felt anything but confident. But deep down he knew this woman wasn't easily swayed, and the illusion of control he had meticulously crafted was beginning to fracture under the weight of her scrutiny. The investor, with a firm voice and a piercing gaze, continued, "Henry, can you explain how your company plans to maintain control over the infrastructure with this expansion? I noticed some recent changes in management. How are you handling that?" Henry hesitated for a second, taken aback by the depth of the question. He hadn't prepared for inquiries about internal management. He thought quickly, trying to regain his composure. Striving to maintain his confidence, he replied, "Yes. We're adjusting our team to ensure efficient management and, well, we have trained professionals to handle any changes that may arise." The woman smiled slightly, as if she had been expecting that vague answer. She leaned forward, keeping her gaze firmly on Henry, and the once controlled atmosphere began to shift. The investor pressed further. "And what about the new chief financial officer? I heard he's made some significant changes to operations. Are you already familiar with the new resource allocation policy he's implemented?" Henry blinked, confused. How did she know about the recent hire? He hadn't yet been deeply involved with the new CFO, and operational changes were being managed by his subordinates. That detail left him feeling uneasy. Henry stammered, trying to maintain his composure. Yes, of course, we're aligning our strategies. Everything is under control." Phoebe glanced at him with a worried expression, realizing that something was amiss. Henry's smile began to fade, and he felt a chill run down his spine. This woman wasn't just an ordinary investor. She knew too much, but how was that possible? Then the investor leaned forward slightly, and with an almost provocative smile, she slowly began to remove her wig. The false hair slid off smoothly, revealing the dark, wavy locks of Meghan Henry, wife, whom he would never have imagined seeing there in that context. She took off her glasses and gently wiped away the heavy makeup that had disguised her familiar features. Meghan, with a calm yet sharp tone, said, "Surprise, Henry." The shock hit Henry like a punch to the gut. His heart raced and he stood frozen. It was as if the ground had vanished beneath his feet. He blinked repeatedly, trying to grasp what was happening, but the truth struck like thunder. Henry stammered, disbelief heavy in his voice. "Meghan, what are you doing here? How?" Meghan, now stripped of her disguise, kept her gaze fixed on Henry. Phoebe, standing next to her, was paralyzed, completely bewildered by the unfolding events. Meghan, wearing an expression of calm and control, spoke slowly. "I am one of the main investors in your company, Henry. While you were busy trying to deceive me and parading around with your mistress, I was silently building my own empire. I knew everything. Every move, every meeting, and now I control a significant part of your business." Henry felt the color drain from his face. His mouth opened and closed several times, but no words came out. The revelation was like an avalanche, crushing every ounce of his confidence. Everything he believed he had control over was slipping through his fingers. In a whisper, still incredulous, Henry muttered, "No, this can't be true. You, how?" Meghan, with a superior smile, replied, "Yes, Henry, me. While you underestimated me, I was quietly accumulating shares and influence in the company. I made smart investments, and now here I am. The woman you thought wasn't good enough for your business is controlling more than you ever imagined." The other two investors looked at Henry with a mix of surprise and mild disdain. For them, everything made sense now. Henry was completely exposed and vulnerable. He tried to compose himself, but his hands trembled slightly as he looked at Megan, still in disbelief. Desperate to regain some control, Henry asked, "But why, Megan? Why did you do this? We're married." Megan's voice remained steady, but her words cut deep. "Married? It seems you forgot that more times than I can count. And as for being the CEO, well, maybe you should pay more attention to what's happening in your own company. While you were focused on keeping up appearances and betraying me, I was busy planning my own future." The silence in the room was overwhelming. Henry glanced at Phoebe, hoping for some kind of support, but she stood there, stunned and unsure of how to react. His face was tense, his hands clammy. He had completely lost control of the situation. With a trembling voice, Henry pleaded, "Megan, please, we can fix this. I can make things right. It doesn't have to be like this." Megan, cold and relentless, responded, "Fix what, Henry? You betrayed me. You disrespected me. You thought I was just furniture in your life. Now, it's too late for regrets. I'm in control. And you, well, you'll have to face the consequences of your actions." Henry sank into his chair, feeling the weight of the world crumble around him. Everything he had built, his image, his business, was falling apart before his eyes. And worst of all, the person he had always underestimated was the one who brought him down. As Megan, the other investors, and even Phoebe stared at him in silence, Henry realized that his arrogance had blinded him. He had believed he controlled everything and everyone around him. But now he saw that it was his wife who had been in control all along. He underestimated Megan, assuming she remained oblivious to his actions. But unbeknownst to Henry, Megan was more perceptive than he gave her credit for. Rather than confronting him outright, she quietly observed, piecing together the fragments of his betrayal. Despite her growing suspicions, Megan chose patience over confrontation, waiting for the right moment to act. And unlike him, she had played the game flawlessly. After the initial shock, Henry was still trying to process his wife's presence in that boardroom, while Megan remained calm, as if everything had been part of a perfectly orchestrated plan. The silence in the room seemed eternal until Megan decided to break it, delivering her truth with calculated and relentless precision. Megan, with a serene but firm voice, said, "You know, Henry, it wasn't that hard to discover your betrayals. In fact, you were never very good at hiding what you were doing. I knew from the very beginning. From the very first suspicious glance, from the first poorly concocted excuse. But instead of confronting you then, I chose to let time work in my favor." Henry, still stunned, tried to maintain his composure, but his breathing was erratic. He glanced at the other investors, but they remained expressionless, clearly awaiting the conclusion of this uncomfortable situation. Phoebe, his lover, just stared at Megan, unsure of what to say or do. Henry, stammering, still incredulous, began to speak. "Megan, I can explain. It wasn't—" Megan interrupted him with a piercing look. "Explain what, Henry? That you betrayed me with Phoebe? That you treated me like an obstacle? That you despise me? Underestimated me?" She continued, "I already know all of that. The question is no longer about what you did, but what I did while you thought you were in control." She paused, crossing her arms and facing Henry, who now looked utterly defeated. He felt his heart racing, as if an invisible chain was anchoring him to his chair. Megan, with a cold expression, continued, "While you were distracted, I was building something. I observed, I learned, I studied. Slowly, I began acquiring shares of your company, investing and making decisions you couldn't even fathom. And now, as you can see, I'm one of the primary investors. Every step you took in the last few years was carefully watched by me. I saw you stumble, but I never worried. I knew that in the right moment, everything would align, and that moment has arrived." Henry began to sweat profusely. The weight of what Meghan was revealing was overwhelming. He had always believed himself to be the genius behind the company's success, but now he realized there was a much greater, more strategic force orchestrating everything. What he had thought was his personal victory was, in fact, guided by the hands of his wife. Henry, his voice shaking with desperation, tried to protest. "But the company, Meghan. If you do this, you'll destroy everything. I'm the CEO. You can't—" Meghan cut him off, her voice icy. "Destroy the company? I'm not you, Henry. I worked tirelessly to ensure its success while you were busy keeping up appearances. I was the one truly in control. You were merely a face, a facade. If there's anyone who can take care of this company, it's me." She paused dramatically, watching the impact of her words settle over Henry. Now he was beginning to grasp just how vulnerable he truly was. Not just his image, but his business was crumbling before his eyes. Meghan, with a slight smile, added, "And this meeting? I organized it all. I wanted to give you a chance to show everyone who you really are. I thought it would be interesting to watch you bring your lover to a meeting that I arranged, trying to sell your perfect image. And guess what? You didn't disappoint. Now, everyone here knows who you really are." Henry glanced around, feeling the weight of the other investors' stares. The men beside Meghan maintained neutral expressions, but he knew they must be silently judging his lack of professionalism. Henry, completely at a loss, tried to gather himself. "Meghan, I didn't know. I never imagined you—" Meghan, now looking at him with utter disdain, replied, "Exactly. You never imagined because you never paid attention to me. You thought I was just a simple wife, incapable of understanding business, a burden you carried. But while you were betraying me, I was preparing myself. You underestimated the wrong person, Henry." Henry tasted the bitterness of defeat in his mouth. For the first time, he was confronting the harsh reality that everything he believed he controlled, including his wife, was slipping from his grasp. The tension in the room was nearly palpable, and he knew he was on the brink of losing not only his wife, but also his reputation, and possibly even the company he took so much pride in. Meghan delivered her final blow, implacable. "I don't need you, Henry. The company doesn't need you. I can handle everything on my own, and I will. Now you can keep parading around with your lovers, but understand that when it comes to business, you're no longer anyone. This was your last mistake." The silence in the room was suffocating. Henry looked to Phoebe, hoping for some sort of support, but she seemed as lost as he was. She avoided his gaze, likely realizing she had been pulled into something far larger than she had imagined. With nothing more to say, Henry lowered his head, utterly defeated. He had lost respect, trust, and now possibly even the very company he once cherished. Meghan stood up, calmly addressing the other investors. With a confident posture, she announced, "Now that we've clarified things, we can proceed with the partnership details. If you'll allow me, I have some proposals I'd like to discuss." The investors nodded, recognizing Meghan as the true leader in the room. Henry, for his part, remained silent, knowing that everything he had built, both personally and professionally, was in ruins. The feeling of helplessness was overwhelming, and he knew that, from now on, he was merely a spectator to his own downfall, a witness to the inevitable. He, the man who always believed he was in control, now found himself utterly abandoned. His once unshakable confidence had crumbled, leaving behind a deep sense of humiliation and regret. Megan, now standing and clearly in command, cast one final look at him before speaking, her voice firm and resonant in the room. "Henry, regarding the company," Megan began, her tone steady but authoritative, "I still have some decisions to make, decisions that will impact both the future of the business and our personal relationship. You'll know soon enough. I'm not going to resolve everything here and now." She paused, locking her gaze onto his. There was an air of coolness in her expression, laced with a hint of irony. "I'll let you reflect on all of this for a while." Henry tried to respond, but his throat was dry and the words refused to come out. He knew that any attempt to fix things in that moment would be futile. Megan held not only the reins of the business but also the fate of his life in her hands. Phoebe, realizing there was no longer a place for her in this scene, felt the weight of confusion and discomfort pressing down. She glanced briefly at Henry, but he didn't even register her presence. All she saw in him was a defeated man, a broken reflection of the confident figure she had thought she was involved with. Without a word, Phoebe rose from her chair with as much discretion as possible. She moved quickly and quietly, slipping out of the room, avoiding the eyes of the investors or Megan. She knew her presence there was irrelevant now, and within minutes she would be forgotten by everyone. Megan watched Phoebe leave, but gave her little importance. The Mistress, in the end, was merely an insignificant piece in the larger puzzle that Megan had constructed. Her focus was solely on Henry, and the way he had underestimated her intelligence and patience all those years. The other investors began gathering their documents, already aware that the purpose of the meeting had shifted entirely. They cast respectful glances at Megan, impressed by her stance and control over the situation. They understood that from now on, any decision regarding the company partnership would be in her hands. Turning to them, Megan offered a slight smile and spoke with confidence. "Thank you for your patience. We'll be in touch soon to discuss the next steps. I believe we're all eager to see the company thrive under these new decisions." The door closing marked the end of that meeting, a meeting that should have been a moment of triumph for Henry, but had instead become his greatest defeat. Once everyone had left, Megan gave Henry one last look. He remained seated, his trembling hands resting on the table. He seemed to have aged in mere minutes, weighed down by the crushing revelation. Megan's final words came without a hint of emotion. "When I'm ready, you'll know my decision. Until then, take this time to reflect on your mistakes." With that, she turned and left the room, leaving Henry alone. The door closed with a soft click, and the sound echoed in Henry's mind like the end of an era. He was left there, utterly and completely alone. Henry sat in his now dimly lit apartment, staring blankly at the empty bottles on the table. The grandeur of his meeting room was a distant memory, replaced by the echoing silence of a life stripped down to its bare bones. He was no longer the man in control, no longer the one giving orders. The realization hit him with every passing second, with every breath that felt heavier than the last. He reached for his phone, hoping for a message, a call, anything that would signify he wasn't truly alone in this new reality. But the screen remained blank, just like his future. Megan's voice, steady and unyielding, kept playing in his mind. "You'll know my decision soon." Those words haunted him. He had laughed at the thought of her being capable of action, let alone revenge, but she had taken his arrogance and used it as the very foundation of his downfall. Henry underestimated her, assuming her silence meant submission. Now all he could hear was the silence of his own downfall. He let out a hollow chuckle. Fate had a twisted sense of irony. When the official notice arrived, Henry skimmed the words, but their meaning didn't sink in. His heart pounded in his chest, and beads of sweat formed on his forehead. He read the notice again, slower this time, trying to grasp the reality that Megan had filed a lawsuit months ago. His hands shook, making it hard to keep the paper steady. The words, cold and unfeeling, spelled out his doom: division of assets, majority ownership, and control over the company. It all felt like a surreal nightmare, a bad dream he couldn't wake up from. The court's decision was swift, almost ruthless. Megan's quiet acquisitions over the years had paid off, giving her a significant stake. Her direct contributions, once dismissed by Henry as inconsequential, were now the linchpin in the legal proceedings. The judge's gavel struck with finality, and with it Henry's illusion of power shattered. He was no longer the master of his fate. Megan held all the cards, and she played them with precision. Henry's world unraveled further when Megan fired Phoebe without ceremony. She sent a cold, impersonal email. "Your services are no longer required." Phoebe had been a fixture by Henry's side, his confidant and lover, but now she was discarded like a used tool. It took her less than an hour to pack her things and walk out of the office, leaving Henry to face the fallout alone. Phoebe didn't look back, didn't call, didn't even leave a note. She had aligned herself with power, and now that Henry had lost his, she had no reason to stay. Days blurred into weeks, and Henry felt the weight of every passing hour. The apartment, once filled with luxuries and laughter, now felt cold and unfamiliar. He lost everything that defined him: his job, his wealth, his reputation. The silence was only broken by the occasional ding of news alerts on his phone, each one announcing another victory for Megan's company. Every headline was a cruel reminder of his failure, each success a testament to Megan's strength. Megan, on the other hand, thrived. She restructured the company, implementing changes Henry never had the foresight to make. Her leadership brought in a multi-million-dollar contract, something Henry had only dreamed of securing. As the company's profits soared, so did Megan's confidence. She was no longer the timid woman Henry once belittled. She was the woman who had outsmarted him, outplayed him, and taken everything he held dear. Henry watched from afar, disconnected from the life he once knew. The bitterness in his heart grew with every new article, every mention of Megan's achievements. He had built the company with his ambition, but it was Megan's quiet determination that had turned it into an empire. An empire he could only see from the outside now, through news feeds and whispered conversations that stopped when he walked by. One day, as he walked aimlessly through the streets, he passed by the company's towering headquarters. His eyes lingered on the building's name, which now bore Megan's name in bold letters. The sight felt like a knife twisting in his chest. He had built this legacy, yet he was nothing more than a forgotten chapter in its story. The weight of his mistakes pressed down on him, and for the first time, Henry understood the depth of his downfall. He had been blinded by his pride and his need for control. Now, he was stripped of everything, left with nothing but the echoes of his past and the cold reality of a future shaped by the very woman he had underestimated. And that was Henry's story, a costly lesson in arrogance and underestimating others. As we reflect on everything he lost and everything Megan achieved, it's hard not to wonder if we sometimes fall into the same trap of pride and complacency. If this story made you think or opened up a new perspective, leave a comment below. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Don't forget to hit the like and subscribe buttons so you won't miss our upcoming videos. Let's continue sharing thought-provoking stories and learning from life's mistakes together. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.